Welcome to The Work Within, where we have conversations about mental health and faith to help you live with greater connection and wholeness in your everyday life. The Work Within is a podcast of the Watershed Initiative, supporting the mental health needs of the local church. Thanks for listening. Hi, welcome to The Work Within. My name is John Lin, and I'm your host. And today I'm joined by my lovely co-hosts, Laura Harrison and Lee Tran. Laura and Lee are both seasoned therapists, friends, and just amazing people. So I'm really glad that you guys are joining us today. I wanted to start today's episode with a little riddle. I am thinking of a 4-letter word. We are born into it, and we must spend a lifetime mastering it. It drives us crazy, but without it, we can't live. It's mysterious. It's beautiful. Some would say it's divine. It also causes heartbreak, heartache, heartburn, pain, and grief. It's both spontaneous and deliberate. It's natural and unnatural. One moment it can be the easiest thing in your life, and the very next it can be the hardest thing you've ever done. It has inspired movements and some of the greatest deeds ever done. And it's also in the small stuff of daily life. It's overpromised and underdelivered. Can you guess it? The word is love. I wanted to share why we're trying to tackle such a lofty subject and why I think it's really why it's worth listening to in this episode. There are 4 reasons I want to just briefly mention. First, next week, a lot of people are going to be celebrating Christmas around the world. And so whether or not you're religious, the reality is that the heart of the Christmas story is love. Second reason is that ironically, though, even though we're gathering around this amazing, meaningful holiday, what I've tended to notice is that there are a lot of things around the holidays that make loving others, loving yourself, loving God really challenging. So I think about how road rage seems to go off the rails during the holiday seasons. I think about long lines where people are you can sense the agitation and impatience and aggravation that emerges. There are the inevitable parties where you will see some random uncle or aunt or relative that has off-the-wall political views that just grate on your nerves, and it's hard to love them. And yeah, there's just, holidays are very wonderful, but they're also filled with a lot of stress. And so loving during that time is very difficult. The third reason, and this is not related to any holiday, but just at a broader level, I really believe we need more love in the world. You guys agree? We really need more love. I am vibing with the words of the Black Eyed Peas song, "Where is the love?" Because I look around, maybe you look around, and it's like, goodness gracious, the animus and hostility and the conflict and the division that is just seeped into every sphere of life, our family lives, our churches, our school boards, our neighborhoods, our politics, our government, just at every level it's just at a fever pitch. And I think we need more love. And then the fourth reason, perhaps most important and relevant, is this show is about increasing connection and wholeness in people's lives. And I think the main ingredient to that is love. And yet, as I reflect back on my own journey, it's like we have schools, we have licenses, we have degrees, we have continuing ed, we have all these things to train us in various skills. But when it comes to how do I be a loving person, it's like a lot of us are just, left to fend for ourselves. Or we just absorb pieces and little bits and pieces from our family of origin. And if they were very loving, healthy people, great. And if they weren't, then what do you do with that? And so, Laura and Lee, that's why I'm really excited to talk with both of you. You guys obviously bring a wealth of insight and knowledge as licensed counselors and therapists. And I think mental health has a lot to say to us about how we love. And I just know the two of you, and I've experienced the two of you to be very loving people. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. So today we're going to talk about what is love really, and what can mental health help us understand about how we love, what keeps us from loving well, and most importantly, how do we grow? How do we grow in our capacity to love? So just to tee us off, Lauren Lee, what would you like to say to someone who's tuning in today and they're like, yeah, John, like I want to be a more loving person in my life in this season and beyond that?
I think one of the things you hit on there is like love is an emotion, but I think it's also a discipline, right? It's not something, it's something that you can work on increasing. It's like otherwise we wouldn't even have that goal of being a more loving person, right? If it wasn't something we could actually improve on or change the way we approach. Um, but I think when you think about it being an emotion and also being something that you can grow in capacity, it gets really complicated. How do we do that? And I think a lot of it is like looking at yourself first and thinking like, what am I bringing to the table, and what maybe do I need to clean up in myself first so that I can show up as a more loving person? What filters or what things are running between me and being able to be that more loving person?
I would also say, kind of along the lines of what Laura's saying too, around the discipline. Like I do mostly couples counseling. That's kind of like my area of expertise and what I've spent a lot of time in. And so I get a lot of couples who, I mean, every couple, like when you get married, the intention is to love forever and till death do its part. It's not an issue as much of like the desire to love and to be loved, but a lot of it is in the details of how and when other parts of our lives and who we are and our pain becomes um it just becomes tricky to balance that, right? And so I almost feel like this is a disservice to a lot of the listeners, because it's such a big topic, right? I think it's very much, and as you said, John, there's like so much need for it in our culture today.
Mhm,
See the evidence of how lacking it is and how it impacts relationships and conversations on multiple levels. And it is such a large topic, but it is very, very necessary. And so I come into this conversation maybe thinking about, for the listeners to have, that we want the listeners to be able to walk away with this with some understanding of, well, what does that mean? Like how
mhm,
do we actually do that? Right.
mhm.
And so we can take it from a very big topic down to something maybe more granular too. Yeah, that's kind of what comes to my mind as I think about us entering into this topic together.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
And when you're talking about it, it reminds me of like we're innately born to be selfish, right? When we're little babies and we're born, all the baby wants is love and attention, and the baby wants what it needs, but the baby doesn't necessarily really give you love back, right? The smiles and the coos and things kind of feel like love and they're rewarding, but at our core, what we want is love, but we're not really born to necessarily give it.
To your point, Laura, like we have to learn to give. Like,
Mhm,
um, and we were brought into this world to receive that. And I think actually one of the things I find most common for a lot of people is that we actually do not know how to receive love as well as I think we do, right?
oh,
The the ability to actually receive that love well, to speak to ourselves with kindness, with love, I think is something that's it's very key, I think, in our ability to be able to offer that love, right? And so I hope we in our conversation can dive into that, because I think there's probably a lot more in there that I think people realize.
mhm,
Yes. So earlier I said
yeah,
that love is overpromised and underdelivered. And so whether you're, those of you who are listening, whether you identify as religious or not, I do think there is sort of a universal agreement that love as an ideal or as a principle is timeless, it's beautiful, and it's worthy. But I know a lot of our listeners do identify with faith and would consider themselves Christian. And so I did want to specifically acknowledge this very deep dissonance that I feel and I have been very aware of for a long time. Because as Christians, the gap, right, the gap between our stated beliefs about love and then our lived experience and practice of it, I think it's like a giant chasm. And so, you know, just bear with me a little bit. I just wanted to kind of refresh our memory on how crystal clear Jesus and the scriptures are about the preeminence of love. And then from there, let's talk
mhm,
about some of those things you mentioned, like what keeps us from living this out, because that's what we want to get into. So, for example, at many weddings, you may hear this, 1 Corinthians 13. Paul writes that even if he possesses like all wisdom, power, and he does these great sacrificial things, but he doesn't have love, what is it worth? Nothing. Nothing. And then he says that now abide faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. And then in Galatians, it says that the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself, which I think highlights a little bit of the mutuality, the giving and receiving that we will touch upon later. And I think that's a huge statement because there are over 600 commandments in the Old Testament. And all 600, if you take this seriously, are fulfilled in the command to love one another. And then, of course, Jesus taught his followers the one thing that will distinguish you from everyone else, will distinguish you as my disciples, is the way you love each other. And he says, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And then finally, one more, 1 John 4:8 puts it really plainly. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love.
Mm.
So I read these things, I'm like, these are beautiful verses, beautiful meditations about the nature of love, but I also feel a lot of dissonance. Because I think if you were to ask the average person on the street, does being a Christian make you more loving or less loving? You know, are we known for love? I don't think the answers would be very encouraging.
Yeah, I
And so,
agree.
yeah, yeah. And now this is not to cast stones.
Yeah.
Again, we are trying to bring these things to light so that we can grow. And let's just acknowledge that it's one thing to talk eloquently about love, but it's the doing, the growing in it, the action that's really hard. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Mm.
What do y'all think keeps people from being able to love the way that we want or the way that we say we believe?
Mhm. I mean, I think for Christians, a lot of times there's this dissonance between like trying to figure out, like, okay, I'm supposed to love, but then I'm also supposed to, and this may or may not be true for all people, obviously not true for all people, but like there's this, what I've noticed with a lot of people is there's like this, I'm supposed to love, but I'm also supposed to hold accountable and hold a standard. And then what do I do when I'm faced with someone who is not meeting the standard or the structure that I find as a Christian to be the right way? And I enter into that relationship with that person and I feel a burden to maybe convert or to convince or to help them see a different way. And a lot of times that's where it starts to come off as not loving, even though my intent is to love them well, right? And so when you talk about, like, if you ask the average person on the street, would you say Christians were loving? I would say most people would say no, that they're judgmental, that that they have very strong boundaries, and like there's a lot of things that they won't accept or indulge. Whereas I think the actual average Christian, given the opportunity to interact with someone that's different from them, could show up in love in that situation. But they have to think about, how do I do that in a more healthy way? How do I do that to where I'm actually showing up in love and not showing up in judgment? I think that's where we kind of get stuck in the Christian culture, is sometimes what we're trying to do is love, but it feels like judgment.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think I like the accountability piece because I do feel like that's a the proverbial tension of like
Hmm.
being gracious, but at the same time offering truth, and both must
Hmm.
coexist, right? And I think embedded in that accountability conversation, and this is what I mean by getting into like how we receive love, is I feel like so much of that accountability question of like, do I need to say something? Should I should
Hmm.
I should I say this or advocate for this or hold someone accountable? I feel like so much of that is driven by a sense of anxiety and fear.
Hmm.
Like if we don't do the thing, if we don't say this thing, right, something bad is going to happen, or I'm not going to be heard. There's some level of fear, I think, that undergirds a lot of the thought process for a lot of people that short circuits the ability to just offer love,
Hmm.
right? And I think if we slow down enough, and this is what I found honestly, just in terms of my own counseling, but if we slow down enough to be able to observe that that fear is there and we receive love from God in that way, because perfect love drives out fear, right? That there is an ability for us to be able to give from a wellspring if we're able to actually know how to manage that anxiety, that uncertain, that fear. Like if I don't do this thing, then something like it's maybe I will feel like a failure, or I feel like I've let someone down, or I feel like I will not protect or provide for somebody if I don't do these things. So there's so many layers that go into that that requires us to be aware to know how to receive that so that we can give love well. Right.
Mhm.
Mm, that's good. That gets into this. I mean, the image I think as you're describing this that I'm getting is this idea of being poured, like water being poured in, and then it creates an overflow flow. You use the word wellspring. And so if there's a wellspring of love that's being poured in that we've received, well, of course, it's a lot easier to let that flow out
Yeah.
into our interactions with people, even people that we disagree with or that we think are going down a path that we disagree with. And so it does highlight this principle that we see that I just read about in 1 John 4, which says that we love because he first loved us. We
Mm.
love because God first loved us. And so this idea that, oh yeah, we experience this unconditional love. And then from there, we become a conduit to share that with others. And yet, when I was serving as a pastor and even just looking at my own life, it's like you can talk to people till you're blue in the face, like, hey, God loves you. Don't you know that God loves you? But I think the average person does not have a working experience of that love.
Mm.
Would you guys agree? Like we assent to it. Yes, I believe God loves me, but I I don't feel it. I don't feel it. And so is that important for people to actually experience it? Do you think it's just enough for them to know it? Or I mean, I don't think it is. I think it's important that we actually experience it at that kind of deep knowing level. But I suspect there are things that keep us from experiencing it. So how can
Yeah.
mental health bridge that gap of experience?
I was actually having this discussion with the pastor actually around this very topic, and what I noted was that oftentimes we know the biblical truth, we know the concept of grace, and the way I described it is like this. It's like sometimes we have this medicine, this salve that can heal of the gospel truth, but it's applied topically.
Mm.
And what has to happen for that to actually take effect is we have to drive down deep enough to where it actually is going to be received and where it will mean something. And so what I mean by that is in a lot of times in the work of therapy, we're drilling down a little bit further to uncover that actually what we wrestle with is maybe feelings of deep shame, inadequacy, and failure, right? And until we can acknowledge that about ourselves, that's actually the pain that we wrestle with, the truth of the gospel will have very little effect because it remains a head knowledge, right? But if
Mhm.
I sit in the experience of my failure and my inadequacy, and at that point really receive grace and to ponder what does it mean to sit in acceptance, radical acceptance from God. That's in my mind what it means to receive love, because if it just stays up here where I don't allow myself to experience and to acknowledge that I feel failure and shame, then I don't know if I actually will ever really truly receive the depth of that knowledge, right? And so I think a lot of what keeps us from being able to go there, if you will, is to go a little bit deeper and to acknowledge where a lot of the pain exists. And that's just with shame. I mean, it could also be in feelings of loss and lament and grief. If I let myself sit there, then I can receive a truth from God that allows me to feel loved by him, right? Um, that has been my experience, and why I would say like allows us to be able to go further than just a simple topical application of a truth, right?
I think one thing important to notice about that too is to have things go deeper, you have to have periods of silence
Hmm.
and periods of reflection. I recently we were redoing my back porch, and usually I like to sit on my porch in the morning and have coffee. I prefer to do it alone. Sometimes I'll read, sometimes I'll just sit there for a little while. But I find that if I can unplug from everything and allow myself just to sit, and it's not necessarily a prayer or a Bible study, and I think sometimes even the practices of getting into a Bible study, it becomes work as well, right? But allowing yourself just to observe God in your surroundings and allow yourself like to hear the birds and to feel the breeze and touch the grass and be with God in that space rather than trying to create a God experience. Just experience God where he is. And I think that just the slowing down, I think a lot of people get caught in the busyness of working to achieve God or working to feel love instead of just sitting in the love. Because, like, if we go back to the baby analogy, the baby isn't doing anything to get the love, it's just asking for it. And we freely give love to the baby. And I think if we see ourselves as that child of God and allow him just to pour that into us, because it's all around us. Just going for a walk, taking out the AirPods, sitting without your phone, and observe everything he's created for us.
One exercise, as you guys are talking, that that I've recently incorporated into my practice, it came from a book called "Now I Become Myself," and the author talks specifically about a prayer meditation exercise where you visualize yourself sitting before God, and it's kind of you're using your imagination a bit, and so that feels a little different. But you do this practice, and at first it feels really odd and weird, and you feel like you're just sitting there, your mind's wandering. But I remember he encouraged the reader to just stick at it, and eventually, maybe like, I don't know, he said like a month into it, you might start to feel something different. And so that's what I did. And the exercise I have is I imagine myself. Um, I had a chance once to go to Banff, and it's beautiful, right? This gorgeous nature. And
Mhm.
there was a moment where I stood in a lake, and there's a waterfall in the back. I mean, it's just gorgeous. And I call upon that scene, and I visualize God just as like a ray of sun and breeze and water all around me. And then I borrow basically from Matthew 3:17, where the Father says to the Son, "This is my Son whom I love; with him I'm well pleased." So I've appropriated that for myself. So there I am. I'm imagining this scene, and I basically visualize God saying to me, "John, you're my son, and I love you so much, and I'm so pleased with you." And that's been a powerful thing. Not every day. Some days I just say that, and I say it, and it's just like, okay, well, I did it. But there have been a few moments where, Lee, like you said, I am sitting with my frailty. I
Mhm.
am sitting with my failures. Or I'm just sitting with the fact that I am just John. And
Mm.
I don't know, it's just a grace where in that space I actually feel the love of God in ways that I have not before. And that's been very, very powerful. So I yeah, this is sort of a mysterious thing. It's not just like a ABC, do this and you will experience it. At the
Mhm.
same time, it does sound like there are some very specific things, like practices like that we can do that open up possibilities,
Yeah.
right? Open up possibilities for God to speak to us and show up in new ways.
I like that example, and I'd like to share an example that I've experienced as well because it articulates how getting out of our comfort zone is so necessary. And doing some things that just feel very abnormal or even kind of strange and awkward. I'll say this, from my own experience around this, about maybe a couple of years ago, I realized I had a really hard time receiving God's love, um, because I really saw God with kind of this imprint of my own earthly father,
Mm.
which meant that the relationship in some way, even though it defied my cognitive understanding, my theological understanding, very transactional. Um, and so I started doing this exercise where, like in the mornings, and this may get a little bit more personal, but I feel like super guilty just laying in bed. Okay, and I'll wake up in the morning and I'm like usually like up and out of bed and I start my day and start working. And if I just lay in bed, there's this guilt that I have that comes up like I should be doing something, like I need to be productive, right? And so what I did was I just allow myself, kind of even just force myself to just lay in bed, kind of like curled up in a blanket and say, I'm like, Lord, I'm gonna lay here and I invite you to come and help me to feel loved by you, to be held by you, right? To receive from you. That I don't need to do anything right now. I can just be here and fight the urge to want to perform or do something and to prove my worth in some way, but just to receive you, right? And at first, honestly, it felt super weird. Like it was like I just done. I don't like the feeling. It felt very uncomfortable, but I made a commitment to say I'm just going to do this daily until I can learn to receive it, right?
Mm.
And I think that made a lot of inroads for me to just transform the way I understood God and how I receive Him, right? The way I perceive Him as well, right? So that example is similar to what you're talking about, John. Just getting out of our comfort zone a little bit.
Mhm.
Think about the way we receive and the barriers that we have to receiving God's love in that way, right? I think it's very powerful.
Yeah. I think you hit on something really key there. I did a Bible study really early on about separating your heavenly father from your earthly father and to pulling those 2 apart because so often we come to God with the vision of father
Mhm.
and fathers are flawed. Our earthly fathers are flawed. And so when you talk about God as father, you automatically assume some of those things about him.
Mhm.
But I think it's so important to notice like all of those disappointments in our life around love color the way we view love. And all the times we've been hurt by love, we've been hurt by people who are supposed to love us, create that distrust almost of love. And I think that's where separating out the heavenly father and the way he's going to love us in perfect love from your earthly father can really make a huge difference. But it's really hard to do because you have so much blending going on there,
Mhm.
right? And so much hurt from past disappointments.
So a couple things there. I mean, yeah, that father image is I think there's some research that speaks to how that specifically is very significant. At
Hmm.
the same time, I do want to say one, scripture, God is neither male nor female, right? And so both parental figures, father and mother, have a huge influence on how we view and experience love. But I'm glad you brought this up because yeah, I know for so many people listening, their stuckness in terms of being able to receive love and give it has a lot to do with family of origin. And so
Hmm.
what does unblending look like? Because I think nowadays there is a lot of talk about like, all right, just cut them off, all right?
Mhm.
And
Mm.
sometimes that is necessary, sometimes it's not. But what does unblending look like for those maybe who are less familiar with those terms, what that looks like?
Yeah, I would say that when you think about unblending, you're thinking about like what is true about each like if you're thinking about you're blending God and you're blending your parents, what is true about each one? What's actually true about your parents? And what's true doesn't have to be positive. It can be negative, right? And even your experience of God may have sometimes been negative as well. And so listing out what is actually true and then noticing like when I am trying to encounter love with God, or if I even encounter love with my parents who may be difficult, what am I noticing about them in that scenario that may or may not be about them? What am I drawing from other experiences? Or what am I falling into? What patterns am I falling into that I may need to adjust a little bit, right? But a lot of it is about like taking experiences and going back through them bit by bit and going, what happened here? What happened here? What happened here? And really slowing things down. Because when you do that, you're able to kind of analyze it better and see, oh, when they said that, I was feeling this, and that's connected to when they would talk to me as a kid. But I'm an adult now, and I can have a boundary here, and I don't have to be talked to like that. Right. Um, I think that's a huge step as you interact with your family as adults is to not regress into interacting with them as you did as a child. Like, notice what's happening there when you go into those relationships. Are you showing up as you do in your friendships, in your work relationships, or are you showing up as the child you were before you left the house?
Yeah. I think I would even try to expand this concept beyond even just how we may interpret God, because I think Laura, to what you're saying is that so much of our definition of love, how we understand it, how we receive it, how it works, is defined by our family of origin. That's our
Mm-hmm.
first imprint, right? And I think God designed it that way, right? And like anything else, as you said, Laura, we're flawed. Our parents are flawed. There's going to be imperfection in that. The difficulty I think that we have is as we become adults, we understand and hopefully in our relationship with the Lord become more deeply ingrained in understanding what biblical love looks like, making the distinction between what that is versus what we grew up with. But I think for what happens a lot of times for most people is that we don't realize how oftentimes we imprint or project, I should say, project what we experience from our younger years onto not just God, but to our spouse, to other people, our coworkers, our children, even because again, it's the definition of the way love works, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of I think what you said, Laura, just kind of challenging what is the actual definition of those things, and do we actually believe that today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that does take a lot of deconstructive work, if you will, meditative work to be
Yeah.
able to really challenge that and to redefine it, right? So yeah, I'll just add that as part of the unblending conversation too.
Yeah. And that goes back to becoming a more loving person being a skill that you have to work on and build, right? Because there are things you can do to as you separate from that person who hurt you in the past and unblend from them, you can see them more compassionately
Yes,
because
I
you're
agree.
not caught in the tension of the blending, basically. And
Yeah,
so when you say, okay, I can release that, they've always had that behavior. That's a behavior they're probably going to have for the rest of their life. And I don't have to hold that as something I need to fix or change or feel responsible for anymore. I can just let them act that way and it's okay.
yeah,
And that's a huge step. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. That's thanks for bringing that up, Laura, because that's an important step, and when you can separate them, it does give you the window and the opportunity, but you have to be intentional about it. You have but the opportunity to be able to forgive, right? To
Mhm.
be able to release the debt. And I'm saying that that's an important step because if you don't, what happens is that debt stays and it gets projected onto other people, right?
Mhm.
And I think this kind of ties in directly with maybe the premise of the conversation in terms of how we love is it begins difficult to love other people when we believe that they owe us a debt, right? And being able to address that debt at its source and to be able to forgive and reconcile that debt, I think is crucial for us to be able to have the wellspring, the surplus of love to be able to give grace to other people, right? And so if we're walking around with all this debt that came from mom and dad or whoever, and we're just putting on other people, yeah, of course, it's going to be very difficult to be gracious and to be loving and to be kind because we think, hey, I'm owed something here, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I would just add that too.
Yeah,
So I'll
one of
just
the
point out,
practices. Oh, go ahead.
okay, so I'm going to point out the fact that part of part of the work of growing in our capacity to love, if I'm hearing you guys correctly, is to do this work of unblending from our families of origin. Oh, isn't that
Mhm.
convenient, therapist, that you guys are saying you have to do the work of going back and doing your family of origin work to grow?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what we're saying, and that's what I'm saying. I mean, so we are a counseling group. We care about resourcing the church with mental health resources, and I think I do want to say very, very plainly, as someone who's been on both sides, that the work of therapy is not, I don't think it's incidental, and it's not just reserved for folks who are going through crisis.
Mhm.
Yes, it's very helpful if you're going through crisis. But if your goal is just to become a more loving person, a more loving parent or spouse or human being, therapeutic work can really make a difference. Because where else are you going to find the time? I remember my wife for years was like, John, you need to think about your family of origin stuff. And I was just like, be quiet, because I didn't want to hear that. I don't want to do that. Like, why would I want to do that?
Mhm.
And it wasn't until much later, unfortunately, but well, it's just the grace of God. The timing is God's timing. But I've finally begun to do that, and it's been very helpful and transformative. So
Mhm.
that is my unabashed plug that therapeutic work helps you be a better disciple, helps you grow as a human being, grow as a more loving person. And so that is something for all of us, not just a select few.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's not uncommon for people to come to therapy and say, I don't want to talk about my family of origin. I just want to deal with what's going on right now. And yes, we can do that. But what I usually try to explain to them is like, we can absolutely do that. And we'll stay in the here and now and we can do that. But what you will find is that the way that you think right now is based in your 3-year-old mind, your 5-year-old mind, your 8-year-old mind who made up rules for how the world works. And you're still living under the rules that your 3, 5, 8-year-old mind made up. And so maybe we might want to challenge those rules and see if they're still effective for your 34-year-old self.
Yeah.
Because they might not be. Maybe. I'll let you figure it out.
That's great, Laura. I like that.
Don't give away all the tricks, Laura.
All right. Let's keep talking about another aspect of this. So Jesus said that we are to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, and we've started to touch upon this mutuality, this receiving. Let's speak about that verse, because I think it's very easy to gloss over that second part. Love others as you love yourself.
Mhm.
How important is that second part? Like, isn't that just being, self-centered or selfish? I thought I was just less of me, more of God, more of others. But somehow I think Jesus was onto something here, right?
Mhm.
What do you guys think?
I'll often talk about your primary relationships. Like your if you're a Christian or if you believe in a higher power of any kind, your first primary relationship is between you and God or you and that higher power, whatever that is for you. The second primary relationship is with yourself. And then with your spouse or your significant other, and then with your children. But so often what we see is it's like flipped. A lot of times the spouse is on top, my spouse is more important than me. Or my children, a lot of times you'll see in families that the children are the highest priority, right?
Mhm.
And when that happens, you're always going to see resentment because you're not taking care of what's best for you first. And I almost wish I could ban the word selfish
Mhm.
because I get that so much from people who are in codependent relationships. Well, that would be selfish for me to do that. Okay. And if you say that a lot, or if you're always sacrificing what you need without consciously knowing that you're giving it away, you're going to feel resentment. So you have to start from the center of what is best for me no matter what happens. And then, okay, if I can't do that, why can't I do that? And can I freely give that away to someone else? And if you can't do that, then you really need to evaluate whether you can do that or not, right? Because it's like when you're talking about love others as you love yourself. I think one of the things we work on therapy a lot is learning to love yourself, and that's so hard. So it doesn't surprise me that we're not loving others well. We don't love ourselves.
Yeah. This may take us in a different direction, but I think Laura, you touched upon it. In what I would say are relationships where there's over or under functioning, where people are just giving of themselves, over functioning, just pouring themselves out, thinking that this is a loving thing to do.
Hmm.
I'm giving and I'm caring, but they're exhausting themselves the entire time. Um, Oftentimes I'll tell people in this situation, and it happens a lot of times in marriages too, but it's like, um, the difference between what I call the this is going to sound strange, but bear with me. I'll talk through the difference between a camel mindset versus a horse mindset. Okay. And what I mean is that like the story goes is if you're going to go through a desert, you're going to go through a long journey through a desert and you got to choose a camel or a horse, right? A lot of times people take what you would say is a horse because a horse, what it'll do is that the horse is strong, it'll ride, it'll give you everything it has, right? It'll pour itself out for you without any consideration for what it needs, right?
Hmm.
And so what'll happen is you'll get into the middle of the desert and it'll die. And now you're stuck in the middle of the desert, right? And so the idea here is that people don't oftentimes think actually being a camel to be mindful of one's own needs. as someone who thinks, okay, I'm not going to go. I have to make sure I take care of my needs, because if I don't take care of myself, then this entire system falls apart, right? And so I think that a lot of people I talk to in therapy, like especially in the Christian world, think course. I got it. I got to keep giving. I have to. It's selfless. I'm gonna give and pour myself out. But they end up being so parched, so void of their nutrients. They can no longer love well. They'll they become resentful. They become angry. They just bail, and they just cut out relationships entirely, right? And so the hard part is to convince people and to create a reason, an argument for saying, hey, like, being a camel and just thinking about your own needs is not a bad thing. You have to be able to do that in order to be able to one, function in life, to be able to manage your relationships well, all those things. So bear with me. That was the entire analogy, just to the whole framework.
Hey,
Yeah, I
listeners,
think it's a good one.
I got to say something. Listeners, if you like those animal analogies, Lee has a lot of these. So you listen to episode 1. We talked about being a bison.
That's right. Yeah, I
7
got all
today. Camel. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that.
Have you moved on from gym analogies?
No, I still got those too. I got all kinds of analogies.
Yeah, but I think that's a really good point, because we cannot pour from an empty cup, right? And so camels are stubborn, and they'll just stop. But I think we need more of that. You need more of what is best for me first, and it's not selfish. It's creating an environment where then you can show up well for others.
Yeah,
I had a client who was a stewardess, and she's like, "Oh, so you mean I have to put my face mask on first?" It's like, yes.
Yes.
She goes, "I
There's a
say it all
reason.
the time."
Yeah. It makes me think about this idea of wholeness. And I'm a recovering people pleaser. And so one of the things that, a lot of people would say, oh, John, you're really nice. You're really, sacrificial. You serve. You do these loving things. But what they did not realize is that when I was doing that from a place of people pleasing, because I was empty, I'm actually trying to meet an unfulfilled need. And so these acts of kindness they're not actually about you. They're about myself. They're about meeting the holes that I am experiencing in my own soul. And so it's such a different vibe and experience to give from a place of wholeness. And that, like you guys have been saying, that allows us, so rather than fear or seeking something from the other person, we can genuinely consider what is best for this individual. And I actually have the resources now to give that. And actually, maybe sometimes I don't have the resources. And so I'm able to say, not right now, or no. So that's an important shift. Let's make this really practical. I mean, this has been very practical, but let's say what advice would you like to give to someone who encounters someone in the next couple of weeks they just find them really hard to love? A friend of mine likes to call them EGNs, extra grace needed. I don't know if that's mean, but we all know EGNs. Sometimes we are the EGN.
I was gonna say, we probably are all EGNs
Yeah,
at
that's
some
where
point.
we are. Yeah,
or
so
somebody's EGN.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, what advice would you like to give to someone who they know? Yeah, oh man, Tuesday I'm gonna be talking to the EGN. How do they show up well for that?
So whether this falls in the EGN category or not, I'll look at this through the lens of a couples therapist, because the conversation oftentimes comes to, like, what does it mean to be loving towards my spouse, and sacrificial, whatever. And so the exercise, the tactical exercise I like to give is it's actually from Gottman's what's called the 5-to-1 ratio. And so John Gottman, if you're not familiar, is a prolific researcher in marriage and couples work. And he has this research that says couples that do 5 deposits to 1 draw are highly are associated and correlated with high success rate couples. Okay. And so what this translates to is that every time you're going to do 1 draw, meaning like if it's going to be a negative feedback or criticism or something like that, offer 5 deposits of affirmation. Okay. Um, and I find that for couples, when they have a structure like that, when they have like kind of a target, like I'm going to try and do a 5-to-1 or 3-to-1 or whatever, it chews them up a little bit to say, okay, I got to meet my quota before I can do the thing, right? And so I oftentimes do this in conflict as well. Say, hey, if you're gonna give a critical feedback or say something that has hurt you, give affirmation, right? Make a deposit first, right? Um, More tactically, what I find that to mean, and this is what I use in my own life too when I'm thinking about how to be loving to people. And this goes to your original, maybe at the top of the segment, John, around like contentious conversations, especially around politics. If I'm talking to people that like have a lot of a lot of energy, if you will, around this stuff, I find that being sacrificial in the way of trying to understand them 5 times before I look for them to understand me once. Okay?
Mm.
So tell me more about that. Okay, so I see what you're saying is this. That makes sense. I'd like to understand that a little bit more, or I never thought about it that way. And so I'm doing 5 of
Mhm.
those before I even approach once. Hey, can I tell you what I think? Right. And so when I weight it that way, it offers this is the gift I give in order to make sure someone feels heard and loved before I even try to see if I can receive anything on the other end of that. So general
Mm.
of thumb, a very tactical tool I give couples and just people in general where we're having contentious conversations, super helpful in terms of neutralizing some of that contentious effect.
You know what I think about that? I think, damn, that's hard.
Yeah.
5 times?
I know
What?
what. Yeah.
5
Yeah.
It
times?
is hard.
That's why we go back to the first part of the segment, which is you gotta make sure you're getting it on the other end, right?
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's I usually frame that up as like be curious instead of being defensive, right? And when you can approach a problem or a person with curiosity rather than defensiveness, and sometimes that's going to take a little bit of preparation, especially if you're going into the holiday season, you know you're going to see that person. And the temptation is like, I'll just make sure I sit on the other end of the table from them, or I'll make sure that I have a lot of buffer between me and that person, right? But and that's okay. Sometimes that is a very valid and okay thing to do, right? But if you can, notice where the behavior or the words get stuck in you, right? And try to consciously release them. Like visualize just like opening up your hand or releasing a balloon. I went on a mission trip one time to Jamaica with a bunch of teenagers, and one of the rituals we did at the end of the day was to throw the annoying thing that happened that day into the ocean. And so everyone would bring their annoying thing, and you could talk about it or you didn't have to talk about it. But after we all talked about it, we all threw them into the ocean, which was behind us on the
Talking about like a
patio.
rock or something like that, right? Not the
No,
actual
it just
person.
no.
Just visualize it.
We talked about what it was like. We didn't throw anybody in the ocean, although I might maybe.
Gotta clarify
But
that.
no, visualize the thing or the event, because normally it's not necessarily the person; it's something that they're doing or saying or behavior, the way they interact with you. Because a lot of times you actually do let. Like sometimes it's your mom, sometimes it's your dad, and you actually do underlyingly love this person. But the way that they interact with you grates on you so hard that it's hard to be in relationship with them. So visualize releasing that annoying thing that they do and trying to see the person that you actually love. And if it's, thrown in the ocean, release a balloon to the sky, think of something you can do with that activity so that it doesn't stick in you and stay with you. Let it flow through you and be gone.
Yeah, it goes back to that debt thing that I was talking about before, like because that like
Hmm.
if it may need to happen multiple times a day,
Oh, yeah.
but to say, okay, this is debt, I gotta release that debt. And so that's a really good uh tactical physical manifestation and representation of that releasing of the debt.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You could, if you feel like someone owes you something, you cannot show up in love
Hmm.
because you're always going to be thinking about what they owe.
Yeah.
Hmm. What would you, I know we have leaders who are listening to this, and we use that term very loosely. A leader is someone who has some influence over another person. So you may have an official position in a company or a workplace. You may be the leader of your family as a parent, leader in your PTO. What would you like to say to leaders about this?
What I would say is that you, as a leader, you have influence to demonstrate it for others, right? And so I think it becomes more important as you have people who are looking to you for guidance or looking to you for direction to be able to release their flaws easier than they may release yours, right? And to do it through demonstration. Like, I have to be able to forgive 1,000 times, right? And show them that it's okay. We can make mistakes. We can move forward, and I can still show up for you and be with you. Now, that doesn't mean there might not be consequences for those things. There's always natural consequences, and let those happen. But showing up and saying, "Hey, I'm still supporting you. I know that that bad thing happened, and I know that, but I'm still supporting you." Right.
I agree with that as well. Like a lot of the things we talked about, I think covered this as well. I'll just be maybe more personally on this one because I consider myself a leader in different arenas. And one of the things that I experience as a leader is how do I put this, the burden or the pressure, whether real or perceived, to have it all together and to
Mm,
provide for other people. And so what it does is it creates this one-way street where I have to give out and I'm never in a position to receive, right? And that's part of leadership. Like, like your analogy before, Laura, of like, of a child, like a parent gives to a child does not give back, right?
hmm
And so for leaders, it creates this conundrum of like, you're constantly pouring yourself out. And if you're not careful, you're never really filling your tank. And that goes
hmm
back to the story I gave earlier about like a couple of years ago, like, going to exercise. I realized that I had this difficulty of receiving love because of how I experienced God. And what that was doing was it was limiting my ability to properly pour out to other people because I was not receiving the way that I needed to. It really highlighted a deficiency for me. And so I would say that for leaders, I think every leader has to go through this where they have to consider, how am I receiving love, right? Because I can white knuckle it for a while. I can perform this to some degree, but at some point, if you're really going to lead, if you're really going to be an influence, you have to be thinking about, what am I doing to receive that, right?
hmm
And I just want to say, for leaders, it's just a lot harder because there's not a lot of places where you feel like you can do that safely, right? So whether that's with other leaders, people that are not in your organization, you got to find some mechanisms of support, whether it's directly from your time with the Lord or with other people that understand the situation in which you're in, to receive that, right? That's an essential, critical thing. I find that actually a lot of leaders fall because they don't do that. Okay, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
would. One more thing I want to mention on that, because I think that was one of the things I learned from you early on. When I first started as a therapist, I worked underneath Lee, and he was managing the practice. Was to be vulnerable as a leader, and be willing to go first and say, "Hey, these are hard things that are happening for me right now." And you don't have to go super deep, but you do need to acknowledge when you're struggling, because
Yeah.
it's important for your team. If you want them to come to you, it's important for them to see you as, like, you're not perfect either.
Yeah.
And that was something that you've always done really well, and I appreciate that.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
I'd like to say another thing also to leaders, and this is both an invitation and challenge. We are living in a time where leaders are very preoccupied with platform and visibility and influence. And none of those things are bad in and of themselves. But but maybe if nothing else, maybe this conversation can remind us of the preeminence of love. And gosh, leaders, because like you were saying, Laura, because people are looking to you, could you make it your ambition to be a loving leader?
mm,
If that were the main goal, and not what people think is, but really in your heart, what is the main goal? I think that makes all the difference. So there's been a lot of gold nuggets here. Let me try to summarize some of the things I wrote down as we bring this show to a conclusion. One, love can be practiced. It can be worked at, and that's good news. So if you feel like you suck at love, hey, good news, you can work at it, and together we can grow. Secondly, we talked about some practices. Some of them may be awkward at first and really uncomfortable, like
mhm,
trying to visualize God's love or sitting in a blanket and just receiving God's love. But uh, give it a shot. What do you have to lose? What do you have to lose by doing that? Uh, you may have everything to gain if you're able to experience the love of God in a new way. Third, some of the big work is doing that work of unblending from your family of origin and from those first formations. And so that could be freaky for some folks. And so go talk to Laura. She won't force you to do it at first. She'll kind of sneak it in there. That's right. Another thing is we have to learn to love ourselves. And so, we've talked about that in other episodes, but there are different ways we can grow in our acceptance and love of ourselves, radical acceptance. We didn't get a chance to talk about this. I do think it's so important, I think God intends us to experience his love through other people. And so it's key to find at least one safe person.
Mm-hmm.
And that may not be at this time your spouse or the people you hang out with. You might have to look outside of that, but find a safe person that can model and extend real acceptance and love to you, because that is very powerful. And then Lee, you challenged us to 5 times, 5 times. And Laura, you talked about being curious and not defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of good stuff here. I mean, this could take a life, like we said, it takes a lifetime to master. And so I wanted to conclude with this thought. At my church, at the end of every service, we say a sending prayer to wrap up the worship service. And there's a line that I love, and it says, let us be a church, let the church be a community where we learn about love and practice it. And so whether you go to church or not, let us be a people, let us be communities, let us be families, let us be organizations and workplaces where we are learning about love and practicing it.
Yeah.
So have a great holiday. May God go with you. May God bless you and give you strength to do the work. Thanks for tuning in to The Work Within. We hope this show blessed you in some way. Please subscribe and leave us a review. Your support means a lot to us. Finally, if you're looking for a therapist, we'd love to help. Visit us at www.watershedinitiative.com to get started. For a limited time, new clients can receive 10% off their first 5 sessions of therapy by mentioning The Work Within. Join us again next time.